The plastic hat squeaked when it landed on my head, cheap brim, toy gold braid biting my scalp, while the kitchen smelled like frosted sheet cake and lighter fluid from the candles. Laughter burst around the table. My father lifted his phone for the photo he always took when he didn't know how to hold a moment. "Faye's princess," he crowed. "Don't crash the birthday, Captain." The room brightened, overhead bulb too white, reflecting off the foil balloons that spelled RACHEL in wrinkled chrome. My mother's wrist clinked her bracelets as she adjusted the hat, soft voice adding cushion to the blow. "At least you're safe on the ground tonight," she said. "Already cutting cake. Already smoothing the icing like it could calm the air. Safe on the ground." The words scraped like ungreased flaps. I kept my face still and found the checklist in my head, because that's what I do when turbulence is human. Breathe. 2 counts in, 2 out. Eyeballs up, jaw loose. The toy brim shadowed my eyes. In the reflection of the microwave door, I looked like a parody of myself, a child's idea of authority perched on 30 hard years. My flight bag waited by the back door. Worn canvas, my name stamped in sharp ink, my logbook inside still warm from an afternoon sortie. My commander bars sat neat on the counter beside the paper plates, close enough to smell the sugar, far enough to be politely ignored. Evan snapped a photo and winced when our eyes met. Neutral, my brother. Good at it. A man who prefers weather without fronts. "It's a joke," he mouthed, an apology that always arrived with the cake. "Make a wish," Dad said, waving the lighter like a wand. The flame popped, tinny and blue. The wax smell carried over the frosting. "Wish for a real job." He laughed, his tell, the small tilt of his head like he wanted the world to confirm he'd kept it light. I blew the candles out because there is a time to follow procedure even when the tower is wrong. Smoke rose in a thin ribbon, sweet and chemical. Somewhere past the kitchen window, a late cargo flight droned toward the coast, a low thunder I felt through the floorboards more than heard. My hands knew that sound the way a surgeon's know a heartbeat. My family heard noise. "Next year we'll get you the deluxe hat," Dad said, tapping the brim with one knuckle so it squeaked again. "The one with the shiny badge." I lifted the toy off my head, plastic sticking to my hair with a small, embarrassed kiss, and set it carefully on the table like live ordnance. "I already have the shiny badge," I said quiet. My voice carried without force. Silence is a runway if you paint it right. Mom slid a slice in front of me. "We're teasing," she said. "We're proud. You know that." They were proud the way people are proud of a news story about someone else. Proud in theory, dismissive in practice. I'd paid last month's mortgage when Dad's overtime didn't post, covered Evan's student loan when the grace period didn't bend, ordered Mom's new inhaler when the pharmacy lost her file. My deposits were invisible. My takeoffs were pretend. "At least you're safe on the ground," she said again, like soft armor. The front door thudded. A cross breeze found the kitchen and lifted the paper napkins. I smelled rain in it, wet concrete and the tin snap of a storm still undecided. I took a forkful of cake and tasted sugar, no structure. That's how their approval had always been. Sweet. Collapsing. "Phase," Dad said, affectionate as a pat on a dog's head. "Every kid wants to be a pilot." I swallowed. The old anger didn't lift. It clarified. I looked at the toy hat, then at my bars, then at the calendar above the stove where Mom had written, "Rachel, dinner," in purple gel pen and underlined it twice. No one had underlined promotion when it came. No one had written check ride, past or night refuel green. Those lived in my logbook with the sweat and the fuel and the pencil smears, not on a family wall. My phone buzzed on the counter, a vibration that traveled into bone before my brain read it. Ops. A strip of text, tasking update. Stand by for Pacific Relief rotation. Wheels up possible 72 HRs. The tiny, insistent chime that means the real world wants you. "Work?" Mom asked, not looking up. "Yes," I said. Dad grinned. "Tell them you're at your party. Captain's orders." I put my palm over my commander bars, metal cool, edges exact. I felt the line inside me settle to level flight. "I'll tell them I'm available," I said. He blinked, then grinned wider as if he'd won something I wasn't playing for. "After dessert." "Before," I said. I slid off the chair, took my logbook from my bag, tucked the bars into place at my collar, and felt the kitchen tilt back to true. Dad lifted his hands, mock surrender, touchy, touchy. Trained, I corrected. I stepped into the hallway, quiet and clean. Rain smell stronger there. The house dimmed behind me, the toy hat sitting squat and cheerful in my peripheral like a mascot for the life they preferred. I dialed ops. The line clicked, oxygen clean, and I heard myself answer with the calm that had been growing under noise for years. Captain Collins, and I said, standing by for tasking. The voice on the other end matched my tone without knowing the dinner I'd left. Copy, Captain. Will advise. I ended the call. In the dark glass of the framed family photos, Evan's graduation, me mid-hug in the uniform they cropped, I saw my face in dress blues, the bars catching hallway light. Behind that reflection, the kitchen's warm rectangle held my father's grin, and my mother's careful hands and a plastic hat with a squeak I would hear for a long time. Something changed inside me as I stood there. No drum roll, no crash, just the quiet, correct feeling of nose on, wings level. They could call it a phase. I would treat it like weather, noticed, flown through, logged. Back at the table, Dad offered me the toy again with a flourish. One for the road? I pushed the plate of cake toward him instead. You keep it, I said, returning the hat without touching it. I'll bring the plane. I grew up at a kitchen table that smelled like meatloaf and lemon pledge, where bills were fanned out like playing cards and jokes were the family currency. I learned early that if you kept things light, you could float right past what mattered. I also learned how to read a room the way I later read a cockpit. Scan left to right, check gauges, adjust for drift. My logbook didn't live on that table. It stayed in my bag, zipper grit under my thumb, ink smudges at the corners from nights I'd signed after a 12-hour hop. I paid the light bill when Dad's overtime didn't clear, covered Mom's inhaler when the pharmacy lost her script, Venmo'd Evan rent the month his internship forgot to pay. They thanked the universe in general. I didn't invoice. At the table, my work was a nice hobby that made for polite conversation. At least you're safe on the ground, Mom would say, pouring coffee that always tasted a little like dish soap, because the mugs lived too close to the sink. Dad treated my career like a costume that would end up in a thrift store. He skipped commissioning, skipped wings, skipped promotion pin-ons because airbase security is a nightmare, and sent balloons instead. Once when he did show, Evan's graduation, he told a cousin, Rach flies those big cargo buses, not the fast jets, like I'd picked minivans over Ferraris on purpose. He called me pilot girl at Christmas and bought me novelty aviators that warped the room into a funhouse. When I took the glasses off, the world steadied. He mistook that for a lack of humor. But the flight line never asked me to be cute. The C-17 asked for checklists and calm. She was a good teacher. She smelled like hydraulic fluid and cold aluminum. The ramp, a chilled cathedral where work had consequences and people told the truth. Loadmasters clipped nets and swore softly when rollers stuck. Crew chiefs ran wands under belly panels and listened to the airframe like a doctor's stethoscope. I learned the weight of 1,000 small decisions and how to keep a crew's breathing together when weather turned predatory. Colonel Sarah Bennett saw me before I had words for myself. You're steady where others get theatrical, she said, handing me the keys to more responsibility with the casual precision of someone sliding a check across a desk. She taught by questions. What are you missing? What are you assuming? Where is the wind in this room? I started wearing the commander bars like they weighed something, not outward, but along the spine. At family dinners, I kept my mouth small and my answers smaller. When Dad called it a phase, I let the word pass like bad weather. Noticed, logged, not obeyed. When Mom said, safe on the ground, I nodded and asked if she'd started the new inhaler because the wheeze had a high note tonight. When Evan sat neutral, eyes on his phone, I texted him bus money under the table. In return, they fed me lasagna and acknowledgement measured in teaspoons. I took the food and saved my appetite for the part of the world that understood check rides. My training logs grew thick. Formation to Hickam with a crosswind that tried to peel paint. Night NVG approaches where the dark turned the world into a green whisper. An airland into a strip that smelled like rain and hot rubber and relief when pallets of MREs rolled out to a town newly without grocery stores. On those missions, the crew felt like the kind of family that doesn't need holidays to know it's real. We had our own table, stainless, bolted to a galley bay, where coffee tasted like metal and bad jokes were currency you could spend without guilt because nobody mistook them for truth. My real family didn't ask about those nights. They asked about weather on my drive to base. They asked if I'd seen any celebrities in airports. Dad asked once if I'd gotten to push any buttons. I said yes, and we left it there. He never asked which ones. The only thing I kept from home on purpose was a habit. When turbulence hit, literal or social, I would touch the top of my checklist with one finger and feel my pulse walk itself back to normal. On rough days at the table, I did it in my head. Airspeed, attitude, power, trim, breathe. On rough days at altitude, I did it with the crew listening. We're fine. We fly the jet. The same tone works in kitchens and cockpits if you're not trying to win. When the Phase Princess joke started, it had a sugar shell. My father's laugh was easy, his eyes bright with the need to be understood as loving, not cruel. But every time the toy hat squeaked, something practical in me filed it under noise. He made the hat louder when real life got quieter. The day the mortgage auto draft hit and bounced, I sent the money, fixed the thing, and listened to him call me Top Gun on voicemail, like a compliment he'd recycled from a movie he half remembered. I saved the audio anyway. Proof of something I couldn't name then. Promotion to captain came in an office that smelled like printer heat and floor wax. Colonel Bennett pinned the bars with thumbs that pressed just enough to hurt and remind. This isn't because they finally believe in you, she said. It's because you kept flying when they didn't matter. The crew took me for tacos and made me hold the chili oil bottle like a trophy. At home, the calendar didn't change. The toy hat remained on a shelf next to Evan's old baseball glove, dust capping the brim like frost. When the Pacific tasking hit, typhoon season, island chains that need wings when ferries stop singing, my shoulders loosened. The world is weird, but it's consistent in its needs. We flew pallets that smelled like wet cardboard and hope. We took off into mornings where the sky tasted like salt and humidity, and worked until our bodies forgot which time they preferred. I logged hours, then days, then the kind of numbers that make the FAA raise an eyebrow, and your crew chief buy you bad gas station donuts for the milestone. Photos came back with me, not the kind you post. A woman in a yellow poncho holding a box of insulin like a relic. A kid tracing the outline of our tail on the tarmac with one finger, eyes fierce. A loadmaster asleep on a pallet of bottled water, mouth open, earplugs in, boots still laced. I put those in the logbook. The family wall stayed curated for college graduations and pets. On a rare weekend home, Dad stood at the grill in a backyard that smelled like lighter fluid and damp grass. He flipped chicken thighs and told the neighbor, I played Air Force between coffee breaks. The neighbor nodded, polite, and asked me if the cockpit had real keys. I said no and yes because both were true. I'll bring the plane, I'd told Dad on my birthday, and the words lodged. They didn't feel like defiance, they felt like procedure. You can't convince a storm, you fly it. You can't teach turbulence to be kind, you trim and hold. When the reassignment hit my phone, pack relief rotation, 72-hour window. Mom asked if I could stay for dessert. At least you're safe on the ground tonight, she said. I looked at the toy hat where it sat on the shelf, a small plastic moon collecting dust, and at my bars catching the kitchen light like instruments set to bright for night ops. Not tonight, I said, already feeling the weight of the flight bag in my hand, already smelling the ramp, already hearing the crew's voices at the jet. Calm, cutting through noise. The call sheet flashed again, DEP pending. And somewhere inside, a switch I'd been guarding for years finally clicked from accept to own. The text from Mom blinked at noon like a runway light I didn't request. Dinner tonight. Dad made pot roast. 6:30. I could smell it through the phone. Onions gone sweet. Gravy thick as habit. I typed copy before the better part of me could plead weather. Procedure says you show up even when the forecast is poor. Their door stuck a little in winter. The rubber seal exhaled when I pushed through. The house met me with steam and dish soap and the scrape of forks being set, metal teeth against ceramic plates. The plastic pilot hat sat centered on the table like a centerpiece, dust brushed off, brim gleaming with someone's sleeve. A joke staged. Dad turned from the stove, wooden spoon raised like a baton. Well, if it isn't Faye's princess, he said, grin wide, testing the air. Evening, I said, hanging my coat, feeling the weight of my bars against my collar like a spine remembering posture. Mom kissed my cheek. Powder, hairspray, pot roast. We're glad you're safe on the ground, she said, reflex wrapped in love. Evan glanced up from his phone and gave me the look that means I'm here, I see you, then tunneled back under neutrality. The table was set for 4, napkins folded into triangles so sharp they looked like they could cut. We sat. Steam fogged my glasses. I let it. Dad slid the hat toward me with the spoon, bumping it against my plate. Parking spot for the captain, he said. The brims squeaked. I touched the checklist in my head. Airspeed, attitude, power, trim, breathe. No hats at the table, I said lightly, sliding it back to the empty chair as if it belonged to someone not invited tonight. Touchy, Dad said, pleased with himself. Trained, I said again. He ladled gravy, ankles of steam rising around his wrist. So, how's the pretend piloting? He winked at Evan as if to share custody of the line. Real, I said, calm. Long week, good crew. Mom topped off my water. Any famous passengers? She asked, hopeful. I smiled because she tried. A pilot named Insulin, I said. Celebrity enough. Dad chuckled. Cargo buses, he said. Not the fun jets. He reached for the salt then, because jokes always need fresh salt, tapped the toy brim twice with his knuckle. Squeak, squeak. Dad? Evan said quiet. What? Dad shrugged, the innocence of a man who thinks tone is everything. We're teasing. That's not teasing, I said, still soft. That's erosion. He set the salt down. Phase, he said, the word greased with affection. You'll come back around. Maybe apply for the airline desk. Good benefits. Safe on the ground. Mom's smile pleaded. He's joking. He's repeating, I said. The fork in my hand felt heavier than stainless. I placed it carefully on the plate and let silence land. The house ticked. The wall clock, the baseboard heater, the kitchen light that buzzed when it wanted replacing. Outside, a gust shouldered the porch and the door gave a small shudder, like a plane meeting a thin vein of turbulence. My phone vibrated against my thigh. A different rhythm, clean and certain. Ops. I excused myself, stood in the hall where the air was cooler and smelled like pine sol and winter coats, and read the strip of text. Tasking confirmed. Pack relief. Show 0400. Wheels 0630. 72. HR window. A second message stacked before I could inhale. Promotion certified. Rank, captain. Effective today. No confetti. Just the exact words lined up like instruments that agree. I stared at the plastic hat through the doorway, the brim catching the kitchen light like it wanted to reflect something it had never earned, and felt the correct click inside. Nose on, wings level. I thumbed Roger to ops, then added, available. Back at the table, Dad was mid-anecdote about a manager who didn't know leadership from a hole in the wall, and Mom was nodding as if kindness required it. I took my seat, slid the hat farther away. I've been assigned, I said. Pacific Relief. Show at 400. And my promotion to captain posted. Mom's hands flew to her mouth, then fell. Tomorrow? She said. So soon? Dad blinked, stalled, then reached for his joke like a life preserver. Captain, huh? Make sure the tray tables are up. He laughed alone. It sounded like a spoon hitting an empty pot. Congratulations, Evan said, the word honest. I felt the relief of hearing a single instrument in tune. Thanks, Ev. Dad set the spoon down hard enough to spatter gravy. You can't stay for dessert? The pitch made it a test. I can't, I said. Crew rest, checklist, go bag. You know, pretend piloting. I kept the smile in place so he couldn't accuse me of a tone he didn't like. I'll call when we land. He leaned back, crossed his arms, the posture of a man denied theater. Always rushing off. Always needed, I said. There's a difference. Mom pushed the sugar bowl toward me as if sweetness could anchor obligations. At least you're safe on. Mom, I said, gentle but final. Please don't say that anymore. She looked down, chastened and hurt. I'm sorry, I worry. I know, I said. Worry quieter or truer. Dad exhaled, big, performative. You can't take a joke. I can land one, I said. He opened his mouth, closed it. The room found a new pressure altitude. I stood, slid my chair in, smoothed the napkin into a square like a checklist page. Thank you for dinner, I said. It was good. I meant the parts that were. At the door, Evan followed me into the cold hall. I'll drive you, he said. I'm good, I said, squeezing his shoulder. Tell him I left the hat. He smirked quick. He'll figure it out. Outside, the night had switched to clean cold. The air tasted like rain deciding whether to be ice. I could hear, faint and low, a heavy jet somewhere under cloud, steady thunder, the kind that teaches your chest its beat. I breathed it in and felt my pulse sink. In my car, I checked the list. Fuel card, ID, logbook, bars seated, boots polished enough to read the ramp's reflection, sunglasses even if Dawn would be stubborn. I touched the top of my paper checklist with one finger. Airspeed, attitude, power, trim. Breathe. The kitchen light spilled a pale rectangle onto the porch. Through it, I saw Dad pick up the toy hat and turn it like a puzzle he had built and no longer understood. My phone buzzed again. Colonel Bennett. Proud of you, Captain. Wheels up. Make it boring. A second ping. Crew is Lou Marine de Vries. They trust you. I smiled. Trust is a better hat than any brim. I drove toward base on streets that smelled like wet asphalt and laundry vents, the kind of night where distant sodium lamps make puddles look like small runways. At a red light, I imagined the family table behind me. The noise, the steam, the hat returned to its shelf, and felt no need to write it. Not tonight. Flying trims you. You stop correcting what isn't yours. At the gate, the SP checked my ID and glanced at my bars. Quick nod. Respect given without theater. The ramp lights turned the fog into a glowing veil. Somewhere, a C-17 exhaled APU breath. Warm, gritty, home. I parked, killed the engine, sat a beat in the quiet cockpit of my car, and let the switch finish moving from appease to act. My phone buzzed once more. Evan. Proud. Safe sky. We'll tell them to retire the hat. I typed copy. Then bring them to the ceremony when it's time. He sent back a single check mark. We'd both started using the right language. As I stepped onto the ramp, the cold bit my cheeks. JP-8 sharpened the air, the crew bus brakes sighed. Lou waved from the stairs, thermos in hand. Evening, Cap, she called. You bring the plane? I'll bring the plane, I said, and the words fit like gloves warmed on a dash. The family's phase shrank to its right size, weather, while the rest of the map lit up ahead. 3 days later, under a Pacific sky that smelled like salt and wet metal, a different cockpit would tilt. The captain would fall, and everything I'd been practicing at shabby tables and clean ramps would be asked for at once. Typhoon air smelled like wet batteries and warm salt when the ramp lights burned holes in the pre-dawn. The C-17 exhaled a low, constant roar, the kind that straightens your spine and empties your head. Lou handed me the forms, coffee steam threading up between us. De Vries ran a palm down a pallet net like he was checking a horse. Marin thumped the nose strut twice, a mechanic's blessing. Walk, I said. We traced the skin, fuel caps tight, tires squared, panels flush. The metal was cool under my knuckles. The night carried the crisp bite of rain that hadn't made up its mind. I climbed the ladder, the smell of JP-8 and damp aluminum settling into my jacket like a truth you can't wash out. In the cockpit, switches clicked into logic. Checklist flowed. Airspeed, attitude, power, trim, breathe. Lou's voice was dry and warm. Wind 1-8, gust 2-8. Cross but not rude. We like polite wind, I said. She grinned without looking. We launched heavy into a sky still brushing its teeth. The nose lifted, smooth, patient, and the wheels thumped their goodbye. Over water, the world turned to gradient gray, and the cabin settled to a human hum. Straps tightening, thermos lids unscrewing. The occasional thunk of a roller correcting its opinion. Load on time. Crew in rhythm. My hands rode the column light, fingers memorizing small truths through vibration. Out there, strip lights would blink at us like eyelids. In here, we made our own clock. The islands were a relay of need. We landed where roofs had tried to learn how to swim. We took off where schools now wore tarps. We parked next to helicopters that smelled like hot dust and apology. People lined fences, quiet, tense, then looser when they saw pallets of water moving like answers. A girl in a yellow raincoat raised two fingers and tapped them to her forehead, the closest salute she had. I tapped mine back, two fingers to the visor where my aviators would sit if the sun were less shy. Motifs travel. Meaning does too. Hours stacked. The logbook grew a spine. Night NVGs turned rain into green lace. Day ops rubbed my eyes with glare until I remembered to squint less and trust more. In the cabin, DeVries slept crooked on a stack of MREs. Moran mumbled weather like a prayer. Lou taped a handwritten sign near the galley. Pay the coffee forward. When the ramp yawned and swallowed pallets, the hydraulic whine made my molars buzz. I liked it. The airplane told the truth in pressure and pitch. Colonel Bennett's message came between turns. Static in the good way, Captain Paperwork posted. Keep it boring. I pinched the bars at my collar just to feel their edges. They didn't hum in the presence of typhoons. They sat like responsibility and stayed there. My family chat pinged once with a photo of the dog chewing a slipper. The caption read, Pilot Princess, fetch this. I put the phone face down on the glare shield. The rubber leaving a faint gray scuff, I rubbed away with my cuff. We ferried insulin in coolers that sweated, wheels strapped tight. We slid generators whose smell bullied the air. We hauled tarps, then contractors. Then, on a quiet leg, empty seats where strain could finally sit. I logged the nothing as carefully as the somethings. Calm is a resource. You bank it. Mini-turn arrived when the crosswind decided politeness was over. Final at Yap, rain sheets marching sideways, gusts knifing the left wing. Lou's tone flattened. Trend line ugly. Fly the jet, I said. Bug vref +5. Line up lights. Small hands. The wind pushed. The airplane shrugged. The yoke wobbled in my grip. I held it like a wet bird, firm, not cruel. Marin called drift. DeVries murmured, rollers locked. Brakes warmed in my imagination, and I hissed them cooler with thought alone. We kissed the stripe, slid a hair, straightened, and rode the center line like something we loved and had earned. The wheels sang that wet, relieved song. Lou laughed once. Exhale, apology to the weather for doubting me. Again? She asked after we parked, like a junkie for competence. Again, I said, and the crew's grin felt like a family that didn't need birthdays. Word does what it does. You fly enough boring into storms, people start handing you their breath. The crew deferred to my calls without making me prove anything twice. Loadmasters from other birds traded for our time slot. Bennett sent a photo of a whiteboard back home. Collins, go-to in line weather. Someone had doodled a tiny plastic hat next to my name with an X through it. I laughed on the ramp by myself and tasted rain turning to sun. I didn't text it to my father. At night, the cockpit turned monastery, annunciators dim, panel glow low, Lou's pen tapping an absent rhythm on the flight plan. The cabin smelled like coffee and wet socks. I thought about the family table and its plastic centerpiece. I pictured setting it on the glare shield next to the compass and watched it slide aft in the imaginary takeoff roll. It bounced once in my mind and clattered back into the galley where it belonged. Between sorties, I ran the perimeter road to keep the knots from nesting in my shoulders. The air tasted like rust and mango. A KC-135 spooled up nearby, deep throat hum you feel in calves. I timed my breath to the engines and practiced saying no out loud in the unlit parts of the fence line. Boundaries are a muscle. You should train them in weather. Promotion ceremony, such as it was, happened under a hangar fan that clicked when it pretended not to wobble. Bennett pinned my bars in a breeze that smelled like dust and JP8. Short speech, she said. Short. Shortest, I said. Thanks, let's fly. The crew clapped the exact amount. No cake. Someone slid me a mini bottle of hot sauce like a medal. I sent the photo to the family thread and got a thumbs up from Mom, A niece from Evan, silence from Dad. Later that night, my voicemail blinked. Congrats, Dad said. Phase Captain, don't crash. The joke arrived with static, like he'd recorded it in a crosswind. I deleted it and wrote in my log instead. Respect is torque. Apply steadily. We rotated islands and got good at saying hello and goodbye without apology. The plane taught options. Plan A with a plan B that didn't insult A by existing. We diverted twice for weather that couldn't be reasoned with. Both times the crew's breath tracked mine. We rerouted an airdrop when a damaged bridge became a rumor. I said, "We aren't guessing," and turned the yoke enough to make the assumption disappear without fanfare. When the relief wave broke into follow-on work and the map thinned, Bennett told me to take 3 days off my feet and get back to CONUS the way pilots do when the military can't be bothered to charter itself. Hop a commercial ride, flash orders, sit jump seat, stay small. I packed light. Orders, logbook, sunglasses that made the world a dimmer and therefore easier place. The crew teased me like family. Don't critique the landing, DeVries said. Only in my head, I promised. I boarded the 767 through the galley, where coffee smelled civilized, and the ovens smelled like cardboard learning to be food. Karen, the head flight attendant, had the fast, kind eyes of someone who knows who on board will need a blanket before they do. Jump seater? She asked. Captain Collins, I said, showing orders. Air Force, Hickam to Honolulu. Welcome, she said, leading me forward. The cockpit was a different religion. Gloss, insulation, hush, the glass displays like aquarium panes. Captain Michael Torres glanced up, square jaw, fingers drumming a tidy rhythm on the armrest. First Officer David Chin wore nervous neatness like a uniform. Mind if I asked, chin toward the jump seat. Torres waved a hand. Saddle up, he said. You military folks keep us honest. Or bored, I said. He laughed. Chin didn't. The door closed with that sealed space suction you feel in fillings. Karen handed us 3 waters. The plastic creaked in my hand. The cabin beyond murmured like a sleeping town. We pushed, taxied, rolled, lifted. Honolulu at night is jewelry spread on black velvet, then ocean, then nothing. The 707's bones sang a note my C-17 never did. Sleek, smug, competent. I respected her without flirting. Torres chatted, route, weather, a story about a bird strike that left him superstitious of gulls and men named Gary. Chin briefed systems too fast, hands tidy, jaw tight. I let their rhythm become a kind of white noise and watched the tapes scroll and settle. I thought of the family table. Imagine the toy hat perched on a boxed leftover. I thought of Bennett's block letters on the whiteboard. I touched the top of my travel checklist with one finger in my pocket. Paper frayed from use. Airspeed, attitude, power, trim, breathe. The panel hummed approval. The sea below reflected nothing. We hit smooth air so perfect it felt engineered, and for once I let my mind idle. I breathed sea and plastic and that faint cinnamon that airplane coffee leaves on the air when the galley reheats a second pot. Somewhere over the Pacific, between who I had to be for a kitchen and who I was at an altimeter, a clear space opened. Then Torres coughed. Once. Twice. Hard. He pressed a fist to his sternum like he could convince something to sit down, breath hitching. Chin turned, alarmed, the speed tape rising a hair as his foot leaned what it shouldn't. Captain? I asked, already inventorying the panel with my eyes. He tried to stand, went gray, and folded. A neat man suddenly without architecture. Michael! Chin's voice went high and thin. The nose wandered. The airplane asked a quiet question I knew how to answer. I unbuckled the mental chair I keep for nights like this, slid it forward, and let every cheap hat, every checklist, every hour in rain decide the next line. David, I said, voice steady. Hands on the yoke, feet off the panic. We fly the jet. Torres slumped hard, headset skidding, shoulder pinning the yoke. The nose twitched left. The trim wheel purred a warning that sounded like a throat clearing before a shout. David, hands now, I said, already peeling Torres back to neutral. I have control. My voice found the register I say for weather that lies. Low. Exact. You... What? Chin blinked, pupils blown. I have control, I repeated, stronger. My palms settled on the 777's yoke, lighter than my C-17, eager, proud. She wanted direction, not drama. You have radios. I nudged the nose level with 2 fingers and a breath. Karen to cockpit, now. The cockpit door clicked. Karen slid in, eyes already honest. She saw Torres, dropped the waters, and keyed the interphone. Medically trained passenger to cockpit. AED to 1L. Her hands were wind. Captain, pulse? She checked. None. Her jaw set. Starting compressions. David's breathing turned to paper. Honolulu Center. Say it, I told him. Mayday, medical emergency. Request vectors direct Honolulu, priority landing. Souls 246, fuel. I scanned the FMC. Fuel 9.2. He repeated me word for word. The relief in the frequency when center answered was so clean it almost tasted like menthol. Hawaiian 301. Cleared direct HNL. Descend and maintain 10,000. You're number 1. Acknowledge, boss, I said, before David could fumble the readback. We're cleared direct. Descend 10,000. I dialed it in. The alt tape slid obedient. The flight director bars stopped arguing and began to guide. Karen's compression set a physical metronome. AED coming up, a flight attendant panted from the door. Plastic cracked, Velcro ripped. The cabin murmured. Question mark turned low chorus. Medical kit open, Karen said. You fly, we'll fight. Copy. I set heading to the line ATC painted us. Autopilot went on. The yoke steadied, the servos taking my intention and translating it into patience. Speed 300, then 250 below 10. I exhaled. David, run the QRH. Pilot incapacitation. Verify controls. My side engaged, your feet clear. He stared at his hands like they were new, then found the checklist, voice finding grip. Incapacitation. Secure incapacitated pilot. Ensure controls free and clear. Notify ATC. Consider diversion. Done, I said. Set up for the ILS 4 right. He gulped air. ILS 4 right set. Karen's voice stayed even. Charging, clear. The AED popped a sound like a snapped stick. Torres didn't gasp. She resumed compressions without ceremony. Sweat beaded her temples. The cabin's air felt too thin and too perfumed at once. Flight attendants. I keyed PA, keeping it tight, crisp. This is Captain Collins on the flight deck. We have a medical situation. You are secured in your jump seats for descent. Prepare the cabin for an immediate landing. This will be routine and quick. I kept routine in my mouth like a lozenge. Lou once told me, truth doesn't need adjectives. It needs cadence. Honolulu, Hawaiian 301. Requesting straight in, emergency vehicles standing by. Approved, came back. You are clear the ILS 4 right. Winds calm. The runway is yours. Runway is yours. Words that ranked next to oxygen. David's hands shook, then calmed. Approach checklist, he said, as if we'd always been crew. We walked it together, altimeters, approach brief, landing data. VURIF 155, he read. Bug 160, I said. I wanted a whisper of extra mass in the sink. Auto brake 3, flaps 15 on the glide, 25 on final, 30 at the marker. The nose dipped toward the glass blue horizon that Honolulu hides behind. Clouds parted like they'd been told to make way. The island grew, a dark shoulder rising from water, lights like breadcrumbs. The airplane felt wide and precise, like she'd volunteer to finish clean if I respected her dignity. Gear down, I said. Gear down, he echoed. Thunks, whir, 3 greens like a small constellation at my knees. Flaps 15, 25, 30, he called, fingers finally accurate. The white needles aligned their long marriage. Glide path settled. Localizer kissed center. Karen's compressions kept time behind me. Switching, she called. 2 minutes. Another FA suctioned an airway. An oxygen mask hissed. We were a small hospital held together by procedure in a box moving at 250 knots. Speed 160 set, David said. His voice wore muscle now. Thank you, when I said. 2 words. All wait. The outer marker ticked through the headset, da da da. Then the inner marker's quicker truth. Runway slid long and gracious beneath the nose, centerline a white spine. Autopilot off, I said. The yoke softened into my hands. Weirdly light, willing. My C-17 lives like a barn you can dance in. This felt like a kneeboard that could fly. Sync 700, David sang. Correcting 500, stable. Continue, I said. Minimums. Landing. The wheels kissed. I held the nose a beat, then lowered it with a gratitude I wouldn't show. Spoilers thunked up. Reversers bloomed and hummed, that underwater roar like a promise kept. We slowed true. My shoulders dropped a half-inch I hadn't admitted they were holding. 70 knots, David called. Manual braking. Your speed, I said, easing us to a dignified taxi. The tower's voice carried relief disguised as professionalism. Hawaiian 301, exit at Delta. Emergency vehicle standing by. Exiting at Delta, I said. Medical at the gate, please. I keyed the PA again. Ladies and gentlemen, we have landed safely. Please remain seated. Medical personnel will meet us shortly. The jetway slid toward us like a careful handshake. Fire. EMT. Gate agent with eyes that had been crying. Karen kept compressions. Calling it, the EMT said minutes later, crisp, merciful. Time. Silence. It filled the space between instruments and skin. I reached forward and rested 2 fingers on the panel glass because I needed to touch something that had cooperated. The plastic was warm. David sagged. Captain Torres, he began, then stopped, words unavailable. We fly the jet, I said, not as dismissal, as benediction. We did. Karen leaned against the doorframe, breath finely messy, face steady. You were loud in the right places, she said. Thanks to you, I said, and meant all of it. The door opened. The world roared in, fluorescence, jet bridge rubber, radios, the smell of hot brakes and cold air conditioning. Passengers craned. Then, unbidden, they stood. Stand starting, in row 30, sweeping forward like a tide. No clapping, just bodies upright, heads bowed. Not for me, for him, for it. For the fact of being here. I stepped to the PA one last time, voice level. This is Captain Collins. We are on stand. Please follow crew instructions, and thank you for your calm. As the EMTs wheeled Torres past, Karen touched my sleeve. Family, she whispered. Soon, I said. The word landed like a promise I could keep later. Honolulu Ops met me at the jetway with practiced sympathy wrapped in policy. A manager with a badge and human eyes said, "We need your statement." David's hands still shook. I put a palm between his shoulder blades. We'll do it together, I said. I looked at the cockpit one last time. 2 seats, 1 jump seat, a panel that had done its job without vanity. The toy hat in my father's kitchen flashed in my mind's peripheral and slid away. On the tarmac, the air smelled like salt and sun-baked rubber. My phone buzzed with numbers I didn't recognize, and 2 I did. Colonel Bennett, you did your job. We'll take it from here. See me. Evan, saw the news. Proud, retiring the hat. I typed one reply to both threads. Copy. In the crew room, under lights that asked too much of the skin, I gave my statement, precise and boring. Mayday, vectors, ILS, landed, Karen, AED, time of death. I washed my hands twice and the smell of latex stayed anyway. When I finally sat alone, the adrenaline ebbed, leaving me heavier and truer. I pulled out my paper checklist, touched the top with 1 finger, and breathed. Airspeed, attitude, power, trim, breathe. The line held. They would call it heroism on TV. They would put my bars on a Chiron and mispronounce my MOS and show a stock shot of a jet that wasn't ours. My family would finally have a story they understood. None of that would change what mattered. 1 man gone, 246 souls home. We flew the jet. We did the work. I took off my sunglasses and put them on the table because my hands needed to set something down. The plastic made a small click. Satisfying, ordinary. When Colonel Bennett walked in, she didn't sit. She looked at me like you look at a wing root for cracks. Captain, she said, voice low, you kept it boring. I tried, I said. She nodded once, that subtle mercy that says seen. You'll be recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross, she said. Also, go talk to someone about the noise in your head. I will, I said. And Collins? Yes, ma'am. She jerked her chin toward the window where the 777 rested under sun too bright for grief. You brought them home. I brought the plane, I said. On the walk to the curb, the trade winds plastered my blouse to my spine and made the airport flag snap and settle. I thought of a plastic hat on a kitchen table and realized the joke had always been preparation. Cheap, annoying, and the thing I'd trained myself to fly through without losing altitude. Honolulu smelled like jet fuel and plumeria when the first headline crawled across a TV in the crew lounge. Air Force captain lands 7 Neptune after pilot collapses, 246 safe. The screen showed stock footage that wasn't our plane. The Chiron got my rank right and my aircraft wrong. The vending machine hummed too loudly. The air conditioning licked the back of my neck cold. Colonel Bennett called before the press officer could find me. Breathe first, she said. Then statement. Her voice had the warmth of coffee and the bite of orders. You'll be recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross. You will also make an appointment with behavioral health. Both are non-negotiable. Copy, I said, rubbing the ridge of my checklist through my pocket, paper rough under fabric. Airspeed, attitude, power, trim, breathe. Public affairs sat me in a conference room that smelled like dry erase marker and lemon wipes. I gave the version that belongs to history, not television. Mayday, vectors, ILS, teamwork, cabin crew. A recorder blinked a red dot. My voice sounded like someone I trusted. Karen sat to my left, knuckles still red from compressions, a styrofoam cup of water leaving a wet ring on the table. You were loud in the right places, she said again, softer. Thanks for the landing. Thanks for the heartbeat, I said. We touched elbows, professional and human. My phone vibrated across the laminate like a small animal. Numbers I didn't know piled up. 2 I did waited. I opened the family thread. Evan first. Proud of you. Retired the hat, for real. A photo followed. My father's plastic pilot hat in a recycling bin. Brim bent, chrome braid dulled. The image landed with the quiet thud of a thing that finally weighed what it was worth. Mom, we saw. Are you okay? We're so proud. At least you. The text stopped mid-reflex, then corrected itself. We are proud. How can we support you? Dad, they're saying hero. Knew you had it in you. Let us brag. The words tried to stand tall and tripped on themselves. I typed carefully, thumb steady. I'm safe. I need time. No interviews, no jokes. If you want to be proud, be honest, I added, because boundaries need plain language. Respect my work, not a headline. Mini turn. Dad called instead of texting. I answered because avoidance is also a habit, and I was done with those. I didn't understand, he said, breath shaky in a way pride never is. I made it small so I didn't have to be scared. He swallowed. I'm sorry. The conference room's vent rattled once, then steadied. I pressed the edge of the checklist to my wrist, paper rasping skin. Then say it without the hat, I said. And no nicknames, no phase. Ask what a checklist is. Ask what it cost. He inhaled. Audible, human. What is a checklist? He asked. Memory you can hold when your head is loud, I said. A way through. He was quiet long enough for a jet outside to spool, low thunder shivering the windows. Teach me, he said. Slow. I will, I said. After I sleep. Public Affairs slid in with a press release draft smelling faintly of toner. Captain Rachel Collins, USAF, provided critical assistance, exemplary airmanship, coordination with cabin crew, condolences to Captain Torres's family. It was accurate and bloodless the way official words have to be. I signed my piece with a pen that scratched like static. Can we add their names? I asked, nodding to Karen. David Chin, Karen Liu. Absolutely, the PA officer said, already typing. Bennett texted again. Order placed for counseling. Also, coin on my desk. Don't argue. I smiled because she knows me. She added, DFC package moving. Expect noise. Then, proud. Now go quiet. I walked outside. The trade wind pressed my blouse to my skin. The air tasted like salt and warm rubber. On the ramp, ground crew yelled over the whine of a GPU. Somewhere, a fuel cap clinked shut. I sat on a low wall and let the heat soak my back until the adrenaline felt less like electricity and more like light. The first reporter found me anyway. Hair perfect, mic angled like a weapon. Hero captain. Crew, I said, setting a palm up. Not angry, just boundary. Say crew. Her smile faltered, then recovered. She wrote crew in a small notebook like a concession. Back at the hotel, the hallway smelled like industrial carpet and air freshener that wanted to be citrus. I laid my uniform blouse over a chair, the bars glinted dull in lamplight. I placed my aviators next to the paper checklist on the nightstand. The glass's hinge clicked. Small, satisfying, ordinary. I slept with the TV off and the AC loud metal blanket hum that let my brain climb down from altitude. By morning, the Air Force statement had posted. Bennett called once more. Two things, she said, over the sound of her office printer chewing paper. 1. Mandatory debrief at Aero 900 tomorrow. 2. You will not let family rewrite you into a mascot. You will set the pace. Copy, I said, smiling at the word pace. She'd been teaching me that without saying it. Mom texted a photo of the family table. No plastic hat, just pot roast, plates, a folded napkin where the toy used to sit. Seat is yours when you're ready. I sent back a single line. I'll bring the plane, on my terms. Before I turned the phone face down, Evan sent one last message. Proud, no qualifiers. Dad wants to come to the ceremony. Okay? Maybe, I wrote. If he listens. Then, tell him there will be no jokes. He can clap or be quiet. I cracked the window. Honolulu slid in. Salt air, a siren far off, a mynah bird scolding the morning. I touched the top of the checklist, paper cool, and let the 5 beats bring me back to center. Airspeed, attitude, power, trim, breathe. Respect before pride. Boundaries before applause. The day held. When I finally looked in the mirror, I didn't see a headline. I saw a pilot who had landed a plane and now had to land a life. Same art, different wins. The Distinguished Flying Cross would be a metal fact. The real work would be keeping my sky uncluttered by other people's weather. The auditorium smelled like floor wax and pressed wool. Brass caught the stage lights and turned them into small suns. My dress blues sat right. The bars felt heavier in public, honest weight. The Distinguished Flying Cross lay on a velvet pad that drank the light. Quiet, unsentimental. Colonel Bennett stood at my side, clipboard tucked, eyes doing their unblinking pre-flight on my face. Breathe, she said. I am, I said, and touched the top of the paper checklist folded in my pocket, edges softened by years. Airspeed, attitude, power, trim, breathe. The hum of the room settled to a manageable frequency. Family in row 2. Mom clutched a program until it creased. Evan sat forward, hands on his knees, respectful as a runway. My father had shaved too close. A nick under his jaw shone pink. No toy hat. His hands were empty. Good. Captain Rachel Collins, the MC said, voice clean as a chime. For extraordinary airmanship and coolness under pressure. The words rolled out measured, unfussy, true. Bennett pinned the medal. Cool metal at my sternum, a precise click I felt in bone, then stepped aside. Captain, the podium, she murmured. I faced the room. The microphone smelled faintly of dust. Flags didn't move, people did. I won't be long, I said. I'm a pilot. We like short finals. A smile rippled. Quiet returned. I was called a phase. I was given a plastic hat. I let that hang, not bitter, just a fact. But you don't need permission to be capable. When lives depend on you, only self-belief matters. A crew saved a plane. A cabin crew fought for a heartbeat. We brought people home. I paused, felt the metal's edge against cloth, heard the HVAC breathe. You gave me a toy hat, but I earned my wings on my own. Payoff delivered, simple as a landing call. Stand rose from the back like a tide. First the airmen, then families, then the row with my mother and brother, and finally, yes, my father. No clapping at first, just bodies upright, heads tipped, the soft thunder of respect. Then applause found its rhythm and stopped right when it should. After, in the aisle that smelled like shoe polish and paper programs, my father stepped into my path. He looked smaller without the performance. No jokes, he said before I could speak. No phases. I was scared and called it funny. Teach me what the checklist is. I kept my voice level, kept my voice. Memory you can hold when your head gets loud, as I said. Boundary you can point to when the room forgets. I waited. He didn't flinch. I believe you, he said, throat rough. I'll clap when it's time and shut up when it isn't. Good, as I said. Start at our table. Respect is daily, not televised. Mom folded me into a hug that smelled like powder and pot roast. Evan bumped my shoulder with a grin that said copy. Bennett drifted close, eyes softer. Instruction slot opened, she said, and the test program wants your packet next year. I'll land both, I said. Weeks later, I walked into a classroom that smelled like dry marker and ambition, and watched new pilots steady their breathing when the simulator lied. Fly the jet, I told them, small hands. On Saturdays, I flew test profiles that made the horizon redraw itself and asked my own checklist's new questions until they answered. When I finally sat at the family table again, meatloaf steam fogging the window, the chair where the toy had sat now empty by design, Dad set out 4 plates in a silence that respected airspace. To Rachel, he started, then corrected himself. To Captain Collins. He lifted his water like a man practicing truth. I placed the program from the ceremony on the buffet and slid the plastic hat into the donation box by the door. One last flight, I said. To a better kids' room. Later, at a small base podium that smelled like sun-warmed plywood and coffee, I closed a lecture for cadets with the only line I knew had earned itself in my mouth. You don't need permission to be capable, I said. When lives depend on you, only self-belief matters. Afterward, I checked the sky. Clean blue over the ramp, a cargo bird turning final like a promise kept, touched my checklist once and went to brief the next crew. You don't need permission to be real. Land anyway. If you've ever been dismissed, doubted, or told your dream was a phase, subscribe for true stories of courage, boundaries, and becoming your own hero.